At exactly 2:47 p.m., somewhere over the Atlantic, the deafening roar of the plane's engines cut to nothing. The sudden silence wasn't peace, it was terror. People froze mid-sentence. Coffee cups rattled on trays. A baby stopped crying, as if even it understood something had gone terribly wrong. In row 17, a 17-year-old girl named Claire Anderson clutched the armrests, her knuckles white. She wasn't like the other passengers, she knew what that silence meant. Her father had been a pilot, and she'd grown up listening to the hum of engines, learning what was normal and what wasn't. This was not normal. This was the sound of a plane losing power, and maybe losing more. A flight attendant rushed down the aisle, pale as paper. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm," her voice cracked before she disappeared toward the cockpit. The cabin filled with whispers, prayers, and the sound of oxygen masks dropping from above. Claire's mother, sitting beside her, grabbed her hand. "It's going to be okay," she said, but her trembling fingers told another story. Claire wanted to believe her, but she kept glancing toward the cockpit door. She knew seconds mattered. 5 minutes passed. No announcement came. The captain didn't speak. The engines stayed dead. The plane began a slow, stomach-churning descent. And then, chaos. The cockpit door swung open and the co-pilot stumbled out, coughing, clutching his chest. The captain wasn't behind him. "Is there anyone here who can fly?" he gasped before collapsing to the floor. The world tilted for Claire. She could hear the muffled screams, the pounding of her own heart. The plane wasn't just in trouble, it was leaderless. Her mother turned to her. "Claire." No, she knew exactly what her daughter was thinking. But Claire's mind was already made up. "Dad didn't teach me for nothing." She unbuckled her seatbelt and pushed past the panicked passengers. Some shouted at her to sit down, others just stared in disbelief. She stepped into the cockpit, and her breath caught. The captain was slumped in his chair, unconscious. Red warning lights glared from the control panel, alarms blaring. The radio was dead. Her hands shook as she slid into the seat. She tried to remember her father's voice. Aviate, navigate, communicate. Always in that order. But right now, communication was gone. All she had was the flying, and survival. She wrapped her fingers around the yoke. The controls were heavy, sluggish. The plane was losing altitude too fast. She had to stabilize it. Pulling on every scrap of memory from the hours she'd spent in flight simulators, she adjusted the pitch, trimming the nose just enough to keep the wings level. Passengers were crying in the background. Somewhere in the chaos, a flight attendant leaned in and asked, "Do you know what you're doing?" "Enough to try," Claire said, her voice steady though her insides were ice. She scanned the instruments. Fuel gauges, altimeter, speed indicators, all telling her she had maybe 20 minutes before they were too low for a safe recovery. She had no co-pilot, no radio, no one to guide her. Just herself, and her father's training. The coastline appeared far in the distance. She needed to get them there. For the next 10 minutes, every second was a battle, fighting crosswinds, keeping the plane level, and praying the engines would restart. She tried every procedure she remembered. Fuel switch, ignition cycle, emergency power. On the third try, one engine sputtered to life. The roar was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. With partial power, she could aim for the small regional airport that appeared on the horizon. Her arms ached from the effort. Sweat dripped into her eyes. At 2,000 feet, she lowered the landing gear, praying it locked into place. The runway loomed closer. She kept her father's last piece of advice in her mind. It's not about a perfect landing, it's about walking away. The wheels hit the tarmac hard, too hard, but the plane stayed upright. The screech of rubber on asphalt filled the cabin as she braked with everything she had. When the plane finally stopped, the silence was deafening again, but this time, it was relief. For a moment, she just sat there, hands frozen on the controls, chest heaving. Then the cabin erupted into cheers, sobs, and clapping. Passengers hugged strangers. Flight attendants rushed forward. Claire's mother appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "You saved them," she whispered. Claire didn't feel like a hero. She just felt grateful. Grateful for her father, for the chance to act, and for the fact that, against all odds, she was still breathing. Later, as emergency crews escorted everyone off the plane, A little boy tugged at her sleeve. "You're the pilot now, right?" he asked, wide-eyed. Claire smiled through the exhaustion. "Just for today." But deep down, she knew this wasn't just about today. This was about courage. The kind you don't know you have until the world goes silent and you realize you're the only one who can bring the noise back. If you want, I can expand this with richer mid-story tension and more cockpit details so it naturally fits a 55-minute YouTube pacing. That way it would really keep listeners on edge until the very end.